Welcome, or hopefully welcome back to another episode of the Reluctant Entrepreneur Podcast, where we dive into the real stories behind entrepreneurial journeys. If you're active on social media, you may already know today's guest. She has about 160,000 followers on Instagram, over 142,000 followers on TikTok, and about 14,000 followers on both LinkedIn and Facebook. And she's a lawyer. Today's guest is Ana Juneja, a dynamic attorney, digital strategist, and educator whose work sits at the intersection of intellectual property law and modern media. In this episode, Ana shares the highs and lows of building her career from the ground up, including how she leveraged technology, perseverance, and a forward-thinking mindset to carve out a space in both the legal and digital worlds. We'll hear how she navigated through the challenges of building her legal career and social media presence and the pivotal moments that defined her path. Ana will also share her insights into intellectual property protection, brand building, and how entrepreneurs can avoid common legal pitfalls while maximizing the value of their ideas. So whether you're launching a business, growing a brand, or just curious about how IP law works in the age of social media, this episode is packed with insight you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Hey, Ana, welcome to the program.
Hi, so excited to be here.
I'm excited that you're excited to be here. Let's talk law and all that stuff. Let's go to the beginning first, though. Tell me a little bit about your background and what sparked your interest into specifically intellectual property law, and how maybe did your upbringing or your past experiences influence your career path?
Yeah, awesome. So I feel very early on, there was one story I think that I always tell is that I used to be really obsessed with a copyright symbol. This is like when I was 3, 4, or 5, like didn't know what was going on. And, all my parents also, they were not IP lawyers or lawyers at all. They would just say it means, you can't copy anybody. When I would ask them what it means, you can't copy this book and things like that. So that was just it was funny that ever happened. I would ask about it all the time because I ended up working in IP for my, entire career. How I really got into it though, obviously is when I started working, I chose this field mostly because I just have a passion, for innovation. And I grew up, with a lot of business owners. And I just, always was a big proponent of people being able to kind of own their IP and really be able to leverage it.
Yeah, I think today in today's global market, although that statement is challenged at the moment with all the tariffs and things like that, but generally speaking, we're a global manufacturing society, and different countries have different respect levels for IP, and it just raises the stakes more than ever. I think intellectual property is more important today probably than any time in our history, and protecting our IP as much as we can in every country
definitely.
we do
Not
business
only
in.
just protecting it, and not only from a global manufacturing standpoint, but also because our world is now only getting more and more digital, and that's definitely not going away. Even physical components of our world now all have digital touch points. I mean, it's really impossible to have any type of business or complete any transaction, even as a consumer, without having some sort of digital touch point to that. So our world is just going more and more in that direction. So IP is not just important to protect IP, but also to leverage it, to monetize it, enforce it, things like that.
So you talk about your past work experience, and I know one of the work experiences was you were working with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, USPTO. How did that experience working there influence your decision to go into IP law? And did you do it because of your experience there or in spite of your experience there? Tell me how that led to the transition.
That's a funny question. So I almost want to say it was kind of in spite of me having experience there. So I worked at the USPTO in law school, and I would say at that point, I was pretty on the path to going into IP. And I thought that working at the USPTO would really solidify it. I basically got an inner working at how the government works and how they treat, people's intellectual property and also just the inefficiencies in the government. It really opened my eyes just in general to how either, however viewpoint you want to have, good or bad, the government is for business owners. I veer on the side of saying that the government is not in, positioning itself to be really a champion for entrepreneurship or business owners. There is incredible regulatory issues. There's so many delays. There's just so many issues. And working right in the USPTO, it really opened my eyes to a lot of that. And, you realize it's not a perfect system and things like that. So I would say there were moments of hesitation for me actually going into IP law. The type of work I do as an attorney now, I'm not against, party against party. It's not person or company against another person or company. It's my client against the government. And that's, the government is my opponent. So making the decision to go into that after working in the government was, kind of a hard one. But, I'm passionate and I love what I do. I now, though, seeing all of these new, very revolutionary things that are happening in real time today with, I think, especially ChatGPT, especially the way LLMs are affecting every single business and the amount of workforce that's going to be wiped out. The lack of action from the government is not surprising to me, but it is always surprising. But working at the USPTO and being in the thick of it really gave me a lot of insight to why they're so slow. Now it helps me, help people navigate these new emerging issues now. That was the biggest benefit I think I have from being in that system. But the transition, I think I was kind of already on that path, and it gave me a lot of insight and experience that helps me today. But the biggest thing, it really helps me with is understanding kind of how bad the government is and why it's so bad for entrepreneurs and people in general in this country.
The legal system is, as I'm preaching to the choir here, this, the legal system is set up on an adversarial basis, right? It's party A against party B against party A. One would think, and this is probably quite Pollyannish of me, but one would think that a government agency that's there to perform a service to the public would not be adversarial. But clearly, the whole, the old saying, I'm here from the government, I'm here to help, the total oxymoron, is definitely demonstrated, I think, in the world of IP in terms of patents and things like that. I know from experience, when you file for a trademark, for example, there's a little bit of dice rolling in terms of the examiner one might get. And I think maybe some examiners are more experienced than others. I don't know. Has that been your experience as well, that you just have an examiner that doesn't get it or is falling on the wrong sword?
Oh, yeah. It's a human process. Just like with a lot of things, it is a roll of the dice. It depends on, whose desk your application is going to land on that day or that cycle. So I would say that they do have relatively, for the guidelines that they have, they're relatively consistent. It is, I would say there's a 5% variation, but, based on, what you're getting now. Alternatively, I will say there's a lot of people now who are in more touchy industries, anything to do with an emerging industry, whether it's tech, AI, any sort of, generative AI, predictive AI, or anything a little bit more novel than that, as well as things like the cannabis industry, just industries that are a little bit more touchy or a little bit more innovative or emerging or, pushing the boundaries a little. They have a real hard time with that. And the variation you're going to get on those type of cases where the guidelines just aren't, rock solid, that is where you're really going to be rolling the dice big time.
Yeah. One bit of experience that I can share, which is probably more typical. I'm sure you get clients like me who come reluctantly. I started my company 33 years ago, and several years into the company, I thought, we should really trademark our logo. And I go, I don't need a lawyer. What do I need a lawyer for? How hard could it be? So I did a little research, early days of the internet. I did a little research, and I filed an application for a trademark. And of course, after a few months, I get a correspondence back that I just could not. I consider myself a bright person, but I just could not decipher what they were asking. And I waited. I sent a response that I thought to what I thought was the question. And then I got another bit of correspondence. And then eventually, if you look up our records, it shows abandoned, so I just gave up. I'm like, okay, not now. And then I tried it again, and it had the same abandoned, ultimately. And then last year, I thought, we've been in business 33 years. We should really protect our logo, right? So I did it again. Again, I didn't use a lawyer. And this took a lot longer. I think about 6 months later, I got some correspondence asking me something that I just didn't get it. So I hired a lawyer just to answer that question. And they did. And we got the trademark. And I don't know. But and it was probably a valid question. I still, to this day, don't understand what their issue was. But the lawyer did. You would have understood it. But that was a lesson for me. I should have just started that way, right?
Yeah, I don't do like a lot of the day-to-day, I guess, on the trademark side as much, but there's a lot of clients, you can hire a lawyer at any stage. So if you get a refusal, then you can hire a lawyer. Then you can also hire a lawyer, to file your patent or trademark or copyright right at the start. I would say it's always going to be, first of all, it's just kind of can be a waste of time to figure out how to deal with filing it, prepping it, and filing it. And second, you're never going to get quite as good of like the broadest, strongest protection possible as like an attorney, at least one who's like, asking enough questions about your business and things would do. So you're going to get better results when you do it from the start, but you're not legally required to have an attorney. You are if you're, going to be suing someone in federal court on behalf of your business, things like that. But just to file and get a trademark, you're not required. You're not legally, they recommend it, but you're not legally required to have an attorney. On average, you're going to get much better results with an attorney. Just so generally, the USPTO is in the business of trying not to register your patents and trademarks. So they issue trademarks. About 60 to 70% of all trademarks, depending on the year, get an initial refusal. That doesn't mean you're doomed. It just means, you have to respond appropriately. And that just requires, kind of drafting a legal brief. I always explain it to people like when you want to do anything, let's say you want to, file for divorce, that doesn't mean you just go on and you file one thing. There's many steps, and then there has to be an approval process and this and that. Now I'm not, a divorce attorney, so I don't know what all the steps would be called, but that is, a common one that people can kind of understand a little bit better. Nothing in the legal system is really that quick or simple at all.
Yeah, I wrote a book called The Reluctant Entrepreneur, the same name as this podcast, and I went through a lawsuit. I left an employer. I started a competitive company, and they weren't happy with that. So, of course, they sued me for 11 causes of action. And I won on every one eventually. But in the book, I talk about how the law, the whole law system works at a deliberately slow and deliberative pace. It's crazy slow, but eventually, it's effective, but the gears grind so slowly. And my lesson with the trademark thing was I should have just spent a few $100 or whatever it was and hire a lawyer to begin with, because I don't even know how strong my protection is. It could be like move a dot, a millimeter to the left and I'm not protected anymore. I don't know, but it was, I don't know. I was just stubborn, I guess. You've had businesses in the past and probably will in the future too. You seem very entrepreneurial. What were some of the significant obstacles you encountered, either in working for a firm or in your own business that you saw, and how did you overcome them?
So I would say one of the biggest hurdles that I have found in my own businesses that now I'm very good at is actually wanting a lot of control on every little thing and not wanting to delegate anything and wanting to just kind of like be in the nitty gritty of anything. I think that's for anyone who is a service provider and maybe wants to provide their services in a particular way. You're never going to want to give it, lawyers, they never want to give the work to an associate and have that associate handle it or have paralegals handle and admins handle, the non-lawyer tasks. It's very hard to just give up control like that. And you're kind of giving, you're putting your client relationship and your reputation in other people's hands. And it's a hard pill to swallow. It's a difficult step to take. And I always had a really hard time with that, no matter where I was, no matter if I, had my own business or if I, was working, even under someone else. Just letting things go is always very hard. I think it is a huge obstacle for business owners and even executives, people who are trying to scale or maximize their productivity. I think letting go of control is a huge obstacle. And now what really helped me kind of get over those things were really becoming incredibly, incredibly organized. So having an SOP for every single thing, having everything recorded. There's so many, tools. You can just use Google Docs. You can use Loom. Like there's no excuse anymore for that, because you can basically in real time record yourself doing something, write instructions for it, and have a checklist process basically that gets followed every time. And that really, really works. So, that was a huge thing that I would say recently overcame, like in the last year or so. But that was, I think my whole life, one of the biggest things I struggled with was really letting go of control.
I share the exact same journey, only you have learned at a much younger age than I did of how to let go and work on and not in your business, right? We hear business people talk about that all the time. You should work on your business, not in your business. But in the early days, you're chief cook and bottle washer, right? I mean, you're everything. And, I'm sure in your earliest days, you were both the attorney and the paralegal and the, mechanic and the whatever, copy machine repair person and all that. That reminds me when I first started the company, and this is, I think, very common in entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs make terrible employees. We would be fired from any job, generally speaking, unless they've learned a lot. I would be better now, but I'm a very creative person, and I've kind of got, people either have left brain or right brain emphasis. I'm kind of either blessed or cursed with both. I'm a very technical person, but I also like to create. So I'm not interested in the details. I'm interested in the vision. So I create products. I designed a bunch of equipment, but don't confuse me with the facts. I'm like a serial arsonist, only instead of starting fires, I start projects. And I'm not all that interested in completing them. So when I started to reluctantly kind of step back, kind of let go, my team just rushed in and filled the void with SOPs. And I'm like, what's an SOP? Standard operating procedure. I'm like, well, everyone knows what they're doing, but we were so tribal that for a time we had employees that were so awful, I couldn't fire them because they were the only one that knew how to do something, right? So they had job security. So my team was able to, basically make the company work efficiently. I was just the crazy guy the mad scientist coming up with all these ideas, and they were the ones that grounded them. And I think every entrepreneur faces that, right? Because you have to be a little bit nuts to start your own company, right? I mean, it's super
Definitely
risky. The statistical chance of failure, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, is 70%. It's horrible odds, and you got to be wired a little bit differently to think that that's a good alternative to a steady job. But it does come with a price, and the price is the same mentality that allows us to do things that most people can't do, also limits our ability to do it well and for long, right? Which is why so many businesses ultimately fail. You've talked in past interviews, you talk a lot about leveraging artificial intelligence, AI, in your work. How has technology played a role in scaling the amount of work you can do, or the intensity, the research, all of everything that goes with your line of law work?
Yeah, so I work in transactional law primarily, which means that my work is non-litigation, which means I'm not in court,
Yeah.
filing lawsuits against random company or, opposing companies.
Yeah.
Um,
I hope it's not
I
random companies. I hope it's opposing
random,
companies. Yes.
obviously not random, but against other, opposing companies. So I am working with my clients to obtain their registrations from the government. I'm working with them to license their work, and I'm working with them to, increase the valuation of what they own, things like that. So all that to say is that a lot of my tasks are very, very re- repeatable. I would say the system and process of doing that, the way you file a trademark, the way you draft, a patent, the way you draft a licensing agreement, things like that are very uh, things that technology can almost at this point do for you if you know how to use it well. So technology has absolutely transformed like my day-to-day practice. Beyond that, it's not just transforming people in white collar industries. It's kind of transforming everything, whether you're in, of course, marketing, legal, HR, everything. It's, now transformed all of those type of, finance, every white collar industry, but it's going to be more and more, going into every other industry as well. And just being such an early and heavy user of technology has really helped me assist, my clients with these compliance issues, regulatory issues, just navigating all of that in a country where the government has definitely not decided to step up and have any, knowledge of these new technologies and how it's, going to be dealt with. So we're operating in extreme gray area. My, I would say, different than other lawyers. I teach a lot of CLEs, which are continuing legal education credits, where every lawyer in every, most states, some states don't require it, but most states, the vast majority of states require you to take these CLEs to stay licensed in that state. And I teach a lot of these CLEs about AI and in the legal field, how lawyers should be using it and things like that. And let's say I'm teaching a CLE, just, I'm just going by averages. If I have, 200 students in that class, I will always ask in those AI CLEs and ask, they're all licensed attorneys, and I'll ask them, how many people have used AI for legal work? And I'll always get 0 hands. I've never had one where somebody raised their hand. And then I'll say how many people have even like used ChatGPT for fun. Have you ever uploaded text messages between your friends and said, who's crazier, right? Like they haven't even done that. There'll be like 1 to 2 hands out of 200 that will go up.
Wow.
So the legal industry is so incredibly behind with tech. For me, it's a day to day. Every single attorney, every single admin, paralegal, every single person on my team is using AI every single day. And we are delivering, better results just statistically than other people in my field are at much higher volume, just because you can do about 100 hours of work in an hour, a few hours. That's actually, when it comes to the legal work, that's the gameplay. It's you're doing the exact same work in a more optimized fashion in a tiny fraction of the time. And as so long as you know how to use it, and so long as you're ethical and you check the work, I would say it's malpractice that attorneys are not using it, because they are charging 100 hours for
Sure.
a few hours of work with the tech that's out there. Um, and further than that, the fact that these attorneys are not well versed in these products, I don't know a single attorney, unless they really work in a heavy tech field, they don't even know what GPT and Chat GPT stands for. Okay,
Right.
like these people are not even living in like the same world I'm living in. It's mind blowing. But setting that aside, it is something everybody in every industry really should be exploring and learning more about. But it really just allows you to do what you do better and faster and more of it.
Yeah, 100%. Chat AI, which I think is artificial intelligence is the wrong name for AI. I think that's what causes people to be scared of it. I think it should be acquired intelligence. There's nothing artificial about it. It was taught by humans. It was taught by devouring billions of published works and instantly forming associations between all of them. Right? It only knows what we've taught it. So there's really nothing artificial about it. But anyway, the cool thing about the law world is that pretty much everything that's documented is a public document because the most lawsuits occur in a public setting. It is a public courthouse, and all the anything that's entered into evidence. So deposition transcripts and motions and transcriptions of testimony. That's all publicly available unless the judge seals it. It's all publicly available. And so, I know lawyers, at least back when I was being sued, this was a lot of years ago, there were volumes of, cases. Every lawyer had the library, right? And then they had LexisNexis, which originally was in book form. And I'm thinking ChatGPT or whatever other version one uses, it's got to be more powerful than LexisNexis, because not only can it search instantly for certain cases, it can form associations. It could make recommendations probably with more analytical thought than just a just a matching database. Like this has certain keywords in it, so I'm going to bring this up for you to review. It can actually form opinions and things like that.
It's incredibly good at pattern recognition. I would say ChatGPT, for the current, no matter what you're using, whether it's OpenAI or Anthropic's library or their actual platforms, it's not as good as a very clever lawyer who knows your business very well. It's actually not creative. It's never gonna, there's just some times where like, if you're a really good lawyer, you can think of really innovative arguments or a new spin. It's not going to be able to do that currently. It cannot do that currently because it's basing everything on human history that's been inputted. And so you are going to get basically the standard deviation kind of what it thinks should be said in these cases. If you want to use it to assist you with more innovation, you kind of have to give it that background info, and then it does a really good job refining your arguments and things like that. But, the AI and how to use it in a legal capacity, that's a whole skill set, really. And unless you've really immersed yourself in it, you're not going to know. And unless you really know what, that ChatGPT is literally math, it doesn't even know words, it doesn't understand anything you're saying. It's a big, giant algorithm that is spitting out what it thinks. It's cosplaying a very smart human. It's saying what a smart human would say. So you need to understand that, it's giving you an insanely amazing work product, if you know how to use the right prompts and extract information. But you have to take it with a grain of salt, and you kind of have to put your own legal brain behind it. So there's so much nuance that goes into using any sort of generative AI as an attorney that, is just not being taught, not being understood by 99.99% of the legal field. It's very against their interest. It's very against any sort of lawyer's interest, because when you can do 100 hours of work in a few hours, you are going to get paid a fraction of the cost.
Sure. On the other hand, one can handle more clients.
One can handle more clients. And, I work in transactional field. We do a lot of flat fee. That's, not an issue for us, at all, because we are not on the hourly model. But businesses, not just lawyers, but any business on an hourly model, which, just for the most part is a lot of lawyers, accountants, some service professionals like that, they're going to be very disincentivized to use any sort of generative AI because being more efficient is very bad for their business.
You talk about flat fee. Is that common in IP law, or is that kind of Ana's contribution to the law industry, the
No,
concept of flat
it's
fee.
really common. I think I do it in a more transparent way. We're really public about, our fees or, different times in the past have been really public about fees, and everybody kind of gets the same fee. There's no special treatment, things like that. So I think that in and of itself is a little bit innovative, but in general, my field has done flat fee for a while, and I envision that other fields of law will transition more to that as they're forced to use more AI from their clients being, like, hey, you should use it because it's there. And, how long are lawyers not going to get away with not using it?
Sure.
Maybe 5-10 years, we'll see.
Right. So your personality, from a 30,000 foot view, your personality is less lawyer-like. I have several lawyers who are friends of mine, and nothing bad about their personalities. I'm not impugning lawyers. There's enough people doing that these days, but I'm not doing that. But you're kind of a think out of the box kind of person. And one example, of course, is your cheerleading for AI, and commenting on that. Lawyers are like some of the last people to show up to the AI party, and you're very visible on social media, talking about best practices and IP and things like that, IP law. What motivates you to kind of swim upstream a little bit from the conventional lawyerly status quo?
I would say purely objectively and selfishly, I don't think I have a choice, because lawyers are now really going to be competing with AI, not just against other lawyers. I definitely don't want to be just in the mix of somebody who's about to be replaced and so invisible that, you're worthless. I wanted to be considered, somebody people could trust, and also like staying on top and ahead of these type of issues so I can actually contribute something meaningful to, the practice of law when I'm assisting these clients, instead of just doing the same thing but a little bit worse than what, a machine can do. So, which is going to very soon be the vast majority, especially of transactional lawyers, and soon all lawyers. But I think I also just didn't care, because as minority female, I work in IP, which can be a really STEM heavy field in a certain sense, more technical field of law. There's just so much, I would say, like microaggression, micro discrimination there, that no matter how much I could play the part, wouldn't necessarily help me that much. So why try that hard to be like everyone else? It doesn't really benefit me at all.
Has your side of the law industry, transactional law, graduated from male dominance to no one really cares anymore?
It's the most male-dominated field of law. Yeah.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, IP law is the most male-dominated, the most, objectively, like, sexist, fewest like amount of females are, patent attorneys, things like that. So because you have to have both a law degree and a science and engineering degree. So there's very few female attorneys that fall into that category. So therefore I'm in a very discriminatory field of law. It just didn't make, no, I could try really hard to have the same personality as everyone else and be very, quiet and subdued and use a lot of jargon and blah, 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 everything they do. It wouldn't make a difference if, you're in that position for somebody like me. I didn't basically playing the part and faking it wouldn't benefit me. So I decided just not to. And I think it's just more important to really build your relationships and kind of let your results work for themselves. I have clients, I've worked with for a decade, and some of them are very corporate, but I also have clients who have left their corporation. They were an executive at a big Fortune 100 company. They left. They've now started their own thing. They have a lot of IP. So you just need to build your relationships and build your network and really genuinely connect with people. And I think that's the most important thing. I don't think you really have to fake it anymore. I think the world is a more accepting place.
I hope so. Yeah. In our industry, I'm in the electronics manufacturing industry, and it's a male-dominated industry, although it is changing. It's also an aged industry. There's a lot of old white guys there, right? And we're all starting to retire, and we're slowly now starting to see more females and younger people enter our space. I speak all around the world at conferences, and it's encouraging to see more and more, particularly younger females, but not necessarily younger, but more diversity. We already have in our industry regional diversity because we have a lot of people in our industry from India and from Asia and things like that. So that's already there, but it's nice to see women in particular going into STEM because I think the future is STEM heavy, right? It just is. We're in a very technical world. What inspired you? I talked about you swimming upstream and kind of drawing outside of the lines and things like that, which is amazing. Part of that drawing outside the lines is your notoriety, if you will, on social media. I've watched quite a few of your episodes, and you seem to practice the same form of marketing as we do, and that is I call it conscious marketing, which is rather than just saying, "Hi, I'm Ana. I'll do any trademark for $600 or whatever," and talking about how good you are and all that. You talk about the process. You talk about best practices, and that's what we do. I find the best way to sell your product is stop talking about your product. Connect on an emotional level to the potential customer and identify and provide them best practice solutions, and then you become an authority. And dare I say, influencer. I hate the word influencer because, I think of, Kim Kardashians and all the, TikTok influencers and all that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about an authority-based influencer, which you definitely are. So how did that start, and what value has being visible online, having followers, and actually providing a value beyond just hyping your own business or your own services?
Yeah, I started on social media and kind of grew a following a little bit on accident. It wasn't really that I expected anything to come of it. I actually didn't think anybody would see anything. People who've known me like in the early days of TikTok definitely knew I did not think anyone was going to see everything. I would not have posted every single thought that was in my head, So
A little more discriminating now, right?
yeah, I definitely would not, post a lot of the things and say a lot of the things that I used to say now that I know that people kind of will see it. But I think because it happened a little bit organically for me, that I wasn't ever really out there on social media trying to grow a business, so to speak. I was really just out there to say whatever I felt like saying. And there weren't a lot of people saying anything, the right things in the IP space or even the business space. There were a lot of lawyers saying a lot of bad things or incorrect things. Sorry, not bad things. I just felt like they I wanted to also put my viewpoints and what information I thought was right out there. And that was just an easy way to do it was, you can make a video, and my videos are not, cinematic or overly edited. They're videos I just film and post in just a couple of minutes. So it's a very quick, easy way to just say whatever you want and get your viewpoint out there. And at least you have, your own record, so to speak, of saying that. Now, when you keep doing that and you are, a professional in your field or an expert in your field or a business leader in your field, you're obviously coming from a place of that's educated. People like us, we're not out there saying BS, or hopefully we're not. And we're saying correct things. And so people are obviously whoever's interested is going to find you and, continue to follow you and things like that. I think that's the best way to market. I think if you provide people with enough value and information and enough content that they start to trust you, you'll never have to ask anybody for money. They'll throw money at you. I've never gone on there and, kind of promoted anything, but we get hundreds of leads every week even when I'm not posting much, because, there's so much content and things out there. So I think if you want to kind of use social media, it's a great time to do it, because, people are looking for content, and people really go to people that they trust more,
Yeah.
So
I read, I forget who said this, but so if you're in my audience and you said this, it's your credit. I just can't remember who it was. But someone said that, today people don't just buy products, they join tribes, right? And an example of that, or at least a former example of that, was Apple, right? People don't just buy iPhones or MacBook Pros. They join the tribe. They wear the merch. They camp in a stupid tent for 3 days in front of a store so they could be, the first in line to get the latest release. Patagonia is kind of similar. Nike kind of has that whole tribe mentality. And when I think of that, I think of, big brands, but I don't think there's any reason why an IP lawyer can't have a tribe behind them. Your followers are part of your tribe. And it's more than just a transactional relationship. It's, they follow you and react and comment. And why, if any one of those 144,000 followers on one of the platforms that you have needed a trademark or a copyright or a patent even, obviously they're going to reach out to you first because they watch your content, and they only watch your content because they like the content, they believe the content, and they find it valuable. So to me, you can't pay enough to an advertising agency to get that level of authority, right?
Exactly. I think there's never been a time before in history where any random person like you or me could say, hey, I want to talk about this because this is what I do for work. And if people want to listen, great. If people want to buy from me, great. Or if you're actually just starting social media in order to promote your business, that too. There's never been a time where a random person, a regular person who is not, a billionaire, doesn't own a media company, could just go on social media for free and just promote their business and do something that takes a few minutes, like make a video that's going to get 1 million views. Like there's never been a time before where this was possible.
That's right. It's a great leveler.
Yes.
People who have social status, celebrities or sports stars or whatever, they have an advantage because they're magnets stronger, right? But they're still on the same free platform that you're on, that I'm on. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't give them any special access. If they wanted a slot on the Tonight Show, they'd have to cash in their celebrity. You and I aren't going to be on the Tonight Show anytime soon. Maybe you will someday, but I probably won't. But in terms of public access on YouTube or any of the social media platforms, it's free and it's even. So the algorithms might favor celebrities, but we all still have the same potential. Let's give my audience some advice here. What are some of the common IP related mistakes that you see entrepreneurs make, or business owners in general, and how can they avoid them?
I think the biggest mistake is not identifying and registering, IP, and then trying when something comes up to retroactively act. That's basically the gist of all the mistakes people make. Not identifying, not registering, and then not having rights in place when you need to enforce it, and or like giving away things you shouldn't give away, signing back contracts, giving away the rights to this and that, or not knowing that you should have made people pay more for this and that, things like that. So just basically a lack of knowledge, I would say, is probably the biggest mistake. I think if you're in business, I always say that starting a business or being in business is a luxury, but the legal side of it is not, because your IP in general is going to be worth anywhere from 30 to 60% of the worth of your business, depending on, what industry you're in and things like that. So failing to deal with it, and especially failing to even know and be knowledgeable about what is going on in your business is a big mistake.
So I create a lot of content, mostly nerdy, technical stuff. And I published a book. And of course, I put the copyright symbol that infatuated you into this world, the little C in the circle, when you were 3 years old. I put that on everything that I create. Now, I know that that's a common practice. I know that I should not put a R in a circle if it's not registered, because that gives me zero protection. But there is, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, there is some protection about, even if you don't file a copyright, putting a copyright symbol, letting people know that the work is copyrighted. How, in terms of recourse, if someone copies my book or any other content which I deemed copyrighted, how much more recourse do I have if I actually file a copyright through you, for example, versus just putting the copyright symbol on my work?
So the copyright law actually recently changed a few years ago. You don't need the copyright symbol anymore. You have a certain level of automatic copyright protection that gets attached to your content immediately, the minute you put that pen to paper, basically. So putting the copyright symbol does not add anything legally, so to speak. It's good maybe to put people on notice, but it does not hold any weight. However, that change in the law happened, like I said, a few years ago. The law changed also to say that in order to enforce your copyright rights for content, original works of authorship, whether it's a book, photos, video, software, architecture, whatever would be what you're trying to protect under, copyright law, or think that you have copyrights to, is that you must register that copyright in order to bring a lawsuit in court. The reason that it's really valuable to register that and have the rights to be able to bring that to court is because copyright statutory damages are very high. It's $150K per incident of infringement for willful infringement. So if somebody does rip you off, you want to be able to go get that $150K. So filing a copyright for a few $100s is absolutely worth it if you're in an industry where your content or, original work of authorship is valuable, such as, for authors, creators, musicians, things like that. Even people who are in commerce and they, if you're an e-commerce brand and you have a photo shoot of your equipment, things like that, you can copyright your photo collection, and people like to copyright the ads that they run too, because they don't want someone to run the same ad and their money is, be wasted.
So the law now, as it stands today, is it presumes copyright, whether one uses a symbol or not.
Copyright. You have copyright rights attached that vest immediately upon creation.
Okay. So it's copyrighted work. If I put pen to paper, that's copyrighted. Is the time to register after I see my work on someone else's page, or before? And if I did not register it and I see it's been infringed upon, is it too late? Can I then register it?
Sometimes not. It's a case-by-case situation with that. We'd have to kind of see the level of use, and all of the timeline kind of matters. So that can vary. You're never going to get quite as good of results as if you had pre-registered right when you created things, because even if you are within a time frame where you could quickly go file something and then enforce your rights, you're paying enormous fees to rush your application. You're now paying thousands of dollars to rush your application. So you could have been paying a few $100s. Now you're paying like, $3,000-$4,000 per thing you have to go protect. So versus being able to have a lot of strategy, maybe doing it in a collection, so you have less filings, things like that. It's just giving you a lot less wiggle room.
But there's no reward. There's no compensation unless it's been registered. That's what I'm hearing. The $150,000 I wouldn't get just from an implied copyright.
So you do have copyright rights. It's not implied, it's vested already. You
Okay.
do have rights. They're just not enforceable without a registration.
Got
You
it.
have to have the actual certificate. So
Okay.
you can use it as leverage for other things, for DMCA, on social media platforms, Shopify platform. You can use it for certain things, but you can't get that statutory damages,
Yeah.
which, if someone's really ripping you off and you're a creator, author, musician, I mean, you're going to want not just, if you're not, Rihanna or Taylor Swift, and you're still a songwriter and somebody copies your song, it's going to be difficult for you to establish damages in court versus you can get your 150K,
Right. So 150 is a statutory amount.
Yeah.
Damages are based on actual damages, and amateurs like me really don't have a lot of damages, right? It's not
Right.
like we took $1 billion away from Taylor Swift.
Right. I mean, it's not that you don't have damages. The
Less monetary.
legal maneuvering to prove that is difficult.
Yeah, yeah. And
Or
I
if
guess you
you're
can only
not,
get so much for
sued.
emotional trauma or something. You create content online. I create content online. How can businesses protect their content and brand identity on social media platforms? Is there such
You have
thing, or is
very
that the
little
Wild
protection on
West?
social media. You have
Sorry?
very little protection on
Yeah.
social.
S-
When you upload things to social media platforms, you basically kind of give up a lot of your rights to them. So you have very limited protection, and that's why people can stitch your videos, duet your videos. I say, if there's content that you're running ads on, don't allow people to download those or stitch those videos and
Yeah.
remix and things like that. But at the end of the day, could still possibly do that. Your best recourse is to copyright it. You just have very limited protection when you're using a free platform for distribution.
Yeah, you're putting it out to the public, so it's hard to
You're putting it
it's hard to
in
put
general, you're allowed to
conditions on
put
that.
it out to the public, and you're allowed to have protection on that. But when you are using the major platforms, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube,
Yeah.
their terms of service are what you're abiding by when you upload content. So if you upload a video to TikTok, you're now agreeing to TikTok's terms of service, which
Sure.
does not allow you to have a lot of protection. So
Yeah.
that is not the same as like if you have a book and you author it and of course distribute it to the public, you are not agreeing to anybody's terms of service in that
Right.
sense. You're allowed to protect it or things like that. So, it's a little bit different. When you're using social media, you're agreeing to their terms of service. Those terms of service don't allow you a ton of protection. And if you really need recourse because people are really ripping you off, you're going to have to copyright and, actually register your copyrights and enforce appropriately.
What legal aspects should entrepreneurs, or anyone for that matter, be aware of when they're creating content and sharing it online? Obviously, music is the poster child, right? And YouTube's really good about taking down music, and they have their strikes and things like that. Other platforms, I host a lot of stuff on Vimeo. Not that our customers go on Vimeo, but I embed from Vimeo, right? Because there's no ads. When you pause it, it doesn't show a bunch of suggested videos like YouTube does. But Vimeo doesn't seem to care about, music
Copyright.
violations. I'm sure someone cares, but they don't automatically take it down like YouTube does. In addition to music, are there other things that you would advise people to just be cautious of when they're putting stuff online? In terms of your specialty?
Imagery you're using. So like, don't steal things from Google if you are putting stuff in your graphics or photos or videos. Like, don't steal clips or photos from other people that you are not sure of. Don't copy other people in that sense. And then with music, any sort of photo or licensing you're going to do, like if you're getting it from some royalty-free library, I mean, you are paying potentially for that license, but if you're not getting it from the original creator, you're now banking on this library company to keep up with all their licensing deals and things like that. So, I mean, just in an abundance of caution, if you never want any issues, obviously only use things directly from the musicians or graphic designers or whatever that you're commissioning things from, and make sure you have their permission, or don't use it at all. But those are things to be aware of, is getting people's clips, photos, like video clips, photos, audio clips, any music, background music or real music, or what else, anytime. Also, another thing is if you're using AI to create content, which a lot of people are now, you're not really able to protect that. So you can't even get a copyright on that.
Right.
So
You didn't
you
create
gotta,
it. It's not yours to protect, right? I
not
mean, it
yours
was,
to protect. I mean, there's a lot of gray area there, and I have a lot of thoughts on that that is not going to go in this podcast episode. But as the law is right now, you at least need, and it's going to be really rare for anybody watching this to find any sort of attorney that understands, any
yeah.
copyright attorney that actually understands AI. So I'm just putting it like as a general statement: be very cautious using AI generated content. I'm going to make like a whole series on this because it is a prevalent problem, and there are very, very few copyright attorneys or any sort of legitimate guidance out there. So I'll kind of go into that more, separately, but those are big issues right now going on with content creation for business owners. Business owners are typically not in the business of creating content. They're usually reluctant to
Sure.
do so. And so when you have a tool like AI that is making it really easy for you, but you might be investing a lot behind the content you create because you're putting hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of ads behind that, this and that, and then you can't protect it or enforce it, you're in trouble, right? So
Yeah.
be very cautious doing things like that at this time.
Yeah. Good advice. A couple more questions. What piece of advice would you offer entrepreneurs striving to protect and grow their brands in today's digital age? You've given a lot of advice in this conversation, but is there a key piece that you would leave my audience with that you wish all your clients knew?
Educate yourself, really educate yourself. Figure out, uh, don't let lack of knowledge prevent you either from being able to monetize something, protect yourself, things like that. Don't assume anything. Just, knowledge is free now. There's no excuse. Every business owner should be, really reading up on everything that has to do with the legal side of business. You don't want to have your business end because of some dumb legal mistake that, was an easy fix.
Yeah. And finally, how did you define success before you began your entry into the law world and entrepreneurship in general? And how do you define it now? Is it different?
I think before like this year, I would have just defined success as having, really big book of business and being able to make a lot of money and being able to be really good at creating good systems and processes and automating and delegating and things like that, and being able to basically scale. I think just in general, I think before recently, my objectives were very much more, or my goals were more objective and clear cut in that sense. I think now I feel I've been in the field so long, even though it's only been like a decade, but I just feel I've kind of conquered a lot of those type of goals that people have, when they first start their career. Now I'm more defining success as wanting to kind of be part of the discussion and the bigger picture when it comes to some more, merging issues with today's just digital age and technology and things.
Excellent.
So
I've never had anyone on my show. This is, I think, episode number, 24 or 25. 24. I've never had anyone on my show that had the same answer before and after, before and now. They all, no one's ever said money. And how about today? Money. It's always something a little bit more philosophical or a little higher altitude, which is cool. I would probably worry if it was the same. But Ana, thank you so much for being my guest today.
thank you for
This has
having
been
me.
insightful. I'm learning. I'll check my mail for the bill. I feel like you've earned an hourly rate here. So I really appreciate the advice that you've given me and, more importantly, my audience. For my audience who would like to learn more about Ana, the best way is to follow her on her various social media channels. And I'll put links to the various channels. If you're watching this on YouTube, just look down, see more, and you'll see links where you can find Ana online. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app, then when it's safe to do so, go to your podcast app, look at the show notes, and that information will be there as well. Ana, continued success and keep swimming upstream. I love it.
Thank you.
You're putting a fresh face on the legal industry, which I would say, among many other industries, desperately needs it. So thanks for doing what you do.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Well, that's a wrap. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Reluctant Entrepreneur Podcast. A special thanks to Ana Juneja for being my guest on the show. The Reluctant Entrepreneur Podcast is available on all major podcast sites and on the Reluctant Entrepreneur YouTube channel. We've been busy recording future episodes with fascinating guests, which I'm excited to share with you. So don't miss out. Subscribe to the podcast to be notified when new episodes are released. We release new episodes twice a month on the first and third Tuesday. If you're an entrepreneur or know of an entrepreneur who would like to be a guest on the show, please let me know. Visit mikeconrad.com/podcast and apply to be a guest or to recommend a guest. Just remember that's Conrad spelled with a K. If you'd like to reach out to me, my email address is mike@mikeconrad.com. Once again, that's Conrad with a K. And a shameless plug here, if you're interested in my book, The Reluctant Entrepreneur, Anatomy of a Business Startup from Uncertainty to Unstoppable, it's available as a paperback as well as a Kindle version, both available on Amazon, and as an audiobook available on both Audible and Amazon. Thanks again for listening or watching. Until I see you again, be unstoppable.